Good evening, good evening. This is a little bit early from usual, and sessions won't really start for another 10-15 minutes. But I'm just let's get rid of that. Just tweeting out. So I'm just setting up for an evening session tonight. We've got a group session, a new thing that's going on, and that's a group discussion that's come out of the Freudian Spaceship kind of work that I've been doing over the last 2-3 months as part of a Free University Brighton course called the Freudian Spaceship. So this is going to be in about 10 minutes. A number of participants from the Free University are going to join me, and we're going to carry on doing some sort of discussion work in public. I'll introduce it at the time at 7 o'clock, so we're starting at 7. In the meantime, I'm going to share with you a little bit of a trailer from the Free University Brighton.
Education is knowledge. Knowledge is power. It takes knowledge to live and survive in this world.
We're here to develop as people, as human beings. And I think that the more that we develop, or the more that we learn, the more that we can develop.
Education to me is a complete privilege for many people, but it's also something that I think should be available to as many people as possible.
Like, education gives you the freedom to make your own mind up about things and kind of self-direct your learning, which you're never ever allowed to do prior to that.
We're learning creatures, I think, human beings, and it's quite a natural process. Which we do all the time. We're always trying to work out what's going on, trying to understand each other, trying to understand situations.
Education does give you the freedom to make choices. It brings people out of their social group and classes, and it gives them access to the world, really.
I think it's about understanding the world that you live in. It's about informing yourself about things that are going on, but it's about enjoying yourself, learning for the sake of learning.
But FUB's so much more than just education. It is a wonderful community to be part of. I've so enjoyed the companionship of the other students, who I've come to really love.
But it's the feeling that you're doing something worthwhile, which makes a difference to people, which can make a difference to maybe broader areas of our lives.
The fact that FUB is available without barriers, free of cost and commitment even, that you can take what you want from it, I think is an absolutely priceless thing, actually.
One thing that I think of a lot, and I think sort of the Free University captures the spirit, is that Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most important weapon you can use to change the world. So I hope in a small way we're sort of educating people to change, if not the world, at least the things in their own lives or their own communities.
Okay, so that was just a little brief trailer to, for the Free University Brighton, which is where a lot of this project comes from. Obviously, I'm doing philosophy in public, and some of that is deliberately outside or just not part of a kind of course. Some of that's just my own research work. So on Monday evenings when I'm just chatting away, when it says philosophy research discussion, often that's just me doing my philosophy in public. So what I mean by that is I kind of report on that week's work. So the stuff when I was looking at Adam Curtis, or when I've been looking at Foucault's work on dreams, that is kind of me doing philosophy in public. So it's like me giving a kind of verbal report on what I'm doing, in a sense, or a verbal conversation about my philosophical activity that week. The other thing that goes on, obviously, is these courses that I teach are a bit more organized, a bit more kind of structured. And they are courses run under the auspices of the Free University Brighton. That's what that trailer was about. And so, yeah, tonight, what we've got are, as I say, a number of guests coming in, a number of people from the Free University of Brighton who are willing to join me in this strange activity of doing philosophy in public. Okay, I'm just gonna let me just pop that trailer on again for you.
Education is knowledge. Knowledge is power. It takes knowledge to live and survive in this world.
We're here to develop as people, as human beings. And I think that the more that we develop, or the more that we learn, the more that we can develop.
Education to me is a complete privilege for many people, but it's also something that I think should be available to as many people as possible.
Like, education gives you the freedom to like make your own mind up about things and kind of self-direct your learning, which like you're never ever allowed to do prior to that.
We're learning creatures, I think, human beings, and it's quite a natural process, which we do all the time. We're always trying to work out what's going on, trying to understand each other, trying to understand situations.
Education does give you the freedom to make choices. It brings people out of their social group and classes, and it gives them access to the world, really.
I think it's about understanding the world that you live in. It's about informing yourself about things that are going on, but it's about enjoying yourself, like learning for the sake of learning.
But FUB's so much more than just education. It is a wonderful community to be part of. I've so enjoyed the companionship of the other students, who I've come to really love.
But it's the feeling that you're doing something worthwhile, which makes a difference to people, which can make a difference to maybe broader areas of our lives.
The fact that FUB is available without barriers, free of cost and commitment even, that you can take what you want from it, I think is an absolutely priceless thing, actually.
One thing that I think of a lot, and I think sort of the Free University captures the spirit, is that Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most important weapon you can use to change the world. So I hope in a small way we're sort of educating people to change, if not the world, at least the things in their own lives or their own communities.
Hello, right. That one there, that was strange. I clicked my light on and the sound seemed to disappear somewhere. Hopefully I can hear people and you can hear me. Look, people are coming in. So as I say, the session's going to begin in a few minutes. Yes, just checking that. Sessions will begin in a few minutes. This is a group session. This is going to be our first session of doing this, and these are people from the Free University of Brighton who've been mainly participating in a Freudian Spaceship course, but they're all involved in the Free University of Brighton. This is the trailer that I was just showing you. And so we're kind of gonna, they have been gracious enough to join me in this experiment of doing philosophy in public. So hopefully that will all be of some interest to you. It may sound a bit like a podcast. It may sound a bit curious. In a sense, we're not quite sure what it's about at the moment. So we'll kind of see how it goes. We're going to be developing what we're talking about as we work through. There's no fixed agenda at the moment. Let me just check a couple of things. Boom. I wonder if that's that sound definitely coming through. Oh, yep, just that was what I wanted to check. There we go. Just to make sure that was coming through. Okay, so I'm gonna just give you. Are we all there? We all there? Oh, people are there. Hello, Sam and Betty. Hello, John. Hello, Rob. Hello, James. People will be along in a moment. I'll bring you in a second as we start at 7 o'clock. All right, what have we got? Let's pop that up. There we go. Okay, I'm going to start bringing people in. So if you're there, I'm going to start bringing you in now. So this, here we are. Let's bring people in. Right, there we are. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. And we can see people at the bottom. There we are. Can I hear you? Can you hear me? Can I hear you?
Hello.
Hello.
Hey. Yeah, I can
Hello.
hear you.
Hello.
We're all kind of here. We may have somebody else coming along. I think was there someone else? Was there someone else? Someone help me here. Was there someone else? I can't think. No.
Gabby. Maybe?
Gabby. That's who. Right. Yes, because I'm thinking. I know at least one person who's not coming. They want to just do it in chat. So yes, maybe Gabby. We'll see them in a minute, maybe. Okay, so everyone's kind of connected and stuff here. We're officially not starting for a moment, so that's good. Hello, Sam. Are you enjoying your outdoors there?
Yeah, I thought rather than being cooped up in my bedroom, I'd sit out in the lovely evening. It's lovely.
And hello, John. How are you doing? Are you in your room?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, some good things happened today, so that's good.
Good things. And Rob, you were just saying something. So hello. I'm just checking everyone can be heard, basically.
Yeah, all good. Yeah.
And good evening, James.
Hello.
Do you want to mute, by the way, in between, or?
Do we want to mute in between? I don't know, actually. Just trying to see that we bring you up there. That's probably do let me know if the audio is affected by. Yep, no problems. I will do that. That was the word for people in the studio. The word in the studio chat there that was there. That was from a previous test just recently. Try not to mention that. So yeah, everyone's kind of fine. I don't know if you need to mute. I don't think so, but we will see. Yeah, we will see. So hello, James. Hello, Morrigan. Is your sound okay? Just say hi.
Yes. Hello.
Hello, and hello, Gabby. We were just thinking there, and Gabby has always has this brilliant mic with a very quiet sound. You are very quiet.
Yeah. Let me turn the preamp up. How's that?
Oh yeah, that we can definitely hear the preamp and you there. That's better. It's because you make music and you have a proper mic that doesn't want to just pick up every other little bit of sound, I imagine, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's going on. Right. Okay. So I'm as probably as unsure about what we're going to do as any of you. But what I ask people to do is just to be willing to introduce themselves and say why they were here tonight. So that's kind of what I asked you all to sort of do. I also asked you to look at that short text by Fuchs, if you remember. This one here that I'm just going to put up now, the group as matrix. Its full title is The Group as Matrix of the Individual's Mental Life. And as just for anybody else, we're not going to have a fixed agenda here. The general idea of this group was that we were going to begin to work on producing texts in a kind of collective space that wasn't academically challenging and was kind of building on the discussions we've been having from the Freudian Spaceship course, which is a course that looks at what I call Fanonian schizoanalysis, so a kind of combination of Fanon and Guattari's schizoanalysis. So that was the kind of starting point, to build on that kind of work done in that course, and for people to begin to sort of be able to write their own texts or develop their own voice. And so there's no kind of fixed specific subjects here. Anyone else got a slightly different impression that they want to give from that? Does that sound roughly how you all understood what I said? Roughly.
Yeah.
All on the same kind of page there. Right, so people may or may not, people don't have to do any particular work here. Some people have busy lives and might not be able to do much during the week. Some people might be able to do more, and so might have to, might give a presentation or might write more. So this is not a kind of we're all participating, we're all forced to do things. The idea is that we're trying to for me, use the group as a way, or the group mentality as a way to see whether we can think differently than when we're an individual. and this is part of the idea, some of the ideas that are both developed by Fanon and by Deleuze and Guattari, in a sense, that we were looking at. So that's kind of, for me, what the issue is I think, or my thesis would be, that there are some things that can only be thought as a group.
I lost your audio, Matt.
Yeah, same.
Oh no.
Okay, that should be back again. It's whenever I touch the back of this damn mic, I have to be really careful not to touch the back of this mic. So anyway, I was saying the thesis is that some things can't be thought as an individual. And obviously within philosophy, that has been done by people like Deleuze and Guattari. It has been done by some others. But generally speaking, philosophers kind of have proper names and they're out there as individuals. And we have this kind of model of thinking as an individualistic kind of activity. And I would say part of the thesis that I'm working on with Eric Harper as on the text of Freudian Spaceship, which is what the course was about. Part of that is that there's kind of multiple layers of subjectivity, some of which are in what we call one-to-one, some of which are in group, some of which are in community. And at these different levels or these different layers, different things can be thought. And it's not capable, in a sense, you're not capable of thinking, outside of the kind of layers of connections we have. And that's one of the reasons I suggested we had a look at Fuchs's The Group as Matrix of the individual's mental life, because he talks there about what he calls transpersonal processes. And he talks about the group being primary in many ways over the individual. And so if we get a chance, we maybe want to talk about that a little bit. But for now, what I want to do is just go through and this session primarily just introduce ourselves and get that sense of feel of the space, because this is a very strange group space. Quite often a group space would be in a classroom, we'd be sitting around, or at least in a pub or something. This is a very strange space that's kind of adapted from the COVID, like Zoom space, moving on to do philosophy. This in itself is a kind of curious space to try and do group work, because obviously lots of bits aren't here, our bodies in particular aren't sort of in the same space. So it's a kind of strange group space. But so for now, I think this session, for me, it's just a matter of us trying to for me, this is just a matter of us trying to sort of begin to find our feet in this space, get a sense of how it works, and then, as I say, explore this idea of beginning to work together to be able to think in such a way that we couldn't previously, by working with this idea of making texts. So that was my slightly rushed and hurried kind of introduction. So I'm going to go around different people. I'm going to work from the bottom of my thing, and just, as I said, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit. You don't have to say anything much if you don't want to, and you can ramble on for as long as you want if you do. And I'm going to start with Gabby, and then I'm going to go to Morrigan, and then James, and then Rob, and then John, and then Sam and Betty. Okay, so I'm going to start with Gabby. How are you, Gabby?
I'm okay, Matt, thanks. I hate starting because I prefer to have a template to work off, but okay, what are we doing? We're introducing ourselves. My name is Gabrielle. I graduated philosophy about 10 years ago in undergrad and haven't been in academia since. I do read and think through a lot of text still, but not with the kind of dedication I'd like a lot of the time to really thinking things through or writing stuff. There's plenty of stuff I'd love to get around to writing as well, and I'm hoping that the group dynamic of a weekly seminar can encourage that and get me to put stuff out there that I've been too cowardly to put out there. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. I'll move on to Morrigan if you like then. I'm going to flip you up, Morrigan. There we go. Hello, Morrigan.
Hello. Yeah, my name's Morrigan. Yeah, there we go. My name's Morrigan. I think most people know this. I'm actually Matt's partner, and we live in the same house together. We have a family together. So that's one set of group dynamics. And we're kind of, you know, sorry, I'm trying to speak for someone else. I'm politically active. I'm in a political organisation, and within that political organisation, I'm part of the care and capacity group, as well as the care and justice group. So that's a group in itself, but also obviously it's a group that takes care of a group of people, and it's really interesting how this can work in a kind of revolutionary organisation, and how revolutionaries operate as obviously they're grouped, but they're essentially in a we live out environment, don't we? The wider society that we live in is ultimately hostile to our revolutionary principles, so that can get people into quite a lot of trouble. So yeah, I'm interested in dynamic-y type thing like that. I've also just taken voluntary redundancy from work because I was in an extremely toxic environment at work, and that had all sorts of like group. I worked in neuroscience and psychiatry, and that had all sorts of issues, and I'm just about to start to train to be a teacher in senior schools, so that also is kind of about the dynamics, particularly around power in that situation. And I've just started planning a text. I've been a writer for years, like all my life, since I was about 6, and I write a lot. And I've just started planning a text that is specifically about the experience of being a woman with belonging to a group of basically menopausal women with anxiety. This used to be called hysterical women. Around how learning how to ride a massive motorbike has changed that, and how it changes other women as well. So yeah, I'm really interested in all of these kind of things, but I don't feel like I have any answers, just loads and loads of questions at the moment. So that's me.
Okay, thank you very much, Morrigan. I'm going to move to James. Okay there, James. How are you?
Yeah, fine, thanks, mate. Hello, everyone. Yeah, well, I've studied a bit of psychology and social sciences at higher education level, although I've never studied any philosophy, not at A level either. But I've done quite a few Free University Brighton courses, and I think I wrote one philosophy essay, although the others tended to be sort of sociology and social sciences. I did the reading map put up on, is it Fulks? Which I found very interesting. It sort of covered a bit of psychology and a bit of, I think, psychopathology and psychotherapy, but I found it very interesting. And yeah, it's just nice to have something to do in the evening. So I thought it sounded very interesting. And I've done some of Matt's courses before, which I enjoyed. So I thought I'd give it a go and come along, really. And that's about it, really.
That's plenty there, James. I'm going to move to Rob. Hello, Rob. Introduce yourself.
Hey there. Yeah, I'm Rob, and we've just done the course with the Freudian Spaceship, where we all met each other, and it kind of felt like there was more that could be done with that group, I think, and it felt like it wasn't really a time to just leave it, and that it could. I like the idea of a group kind of producing something like a productive. That couldn't be produced as an individual, and it feels like this group could produce something. And I like the idea that we don't quite know what it is, but it feels like something will come out of it which couldn't have existed like without this group, which is I find kind of amazing, because it's like if I was just at home reading and studying and whatnot on my own, it seems like there's a sort of limit, like a wall I hit, which I don't think is a metaphor. I think there really is like an actual wall. And then there's something about the group dynamic kind of like breaks through that. So yeah, that's kind of that's why I'm here. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, Robin, I'm going to go to Sam and Betty. John's, I think, oh no, John's back in. Let's bring him back. Hang on, let's bring back in John, and then we'll go to Sam and Betty. Hi, John. I gather you reconnected. Are you okay to introduce yourself?
I don't know what that was all about, but my computer just decided to pack up. So yeah.
Okay, cool. You tell us why you're here and who you are.
Well, my main thing is I've been on a lifelong journey. I don't know if I've told you this before, but when I was at school, I wasn't very clever. For some educational reason. And in my school, in my primary school, they sat the brightest at the front left and the thickest at the back right. We had to use those terms because it was a paid private school. And everyone was sat on tables of 2, and I was sat on a table of 1 right at the back. And I had the forethought to think, why can I not get this information? Why can the clever ones over there get this information? And I couldn't get it. But in just over time, and through a lot of hard work of trying to understand how I learn information, I've managed to get a degree and stuff like that. So to me, philosophy is the actual epitome of what clever is. Because if you can understand philosophy, you can understand what questions to ask, which what philosophers do. I think a lot of other stuff, they're answering questions that are there. I think philosophers are actually asking questions that aren't there. And so to me, to be a philosopher is to be the ultimate, is to sit front left. So that's me.
Very nice, John. And I'm going to go to Sam and Betty for our last little introduction. Hello, Sam and Betty.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear this?
This is where like our little one-to-one relation sort of interacts with the group already. I will go first. All right. I'm Sam. Hello. I am really interested in philosophy, and I'm really interested in schizoanalysis analysis and continuing what we started with the course previously. And I'm really interested in Matt's book and kind of exploring that a little bit more. I have studied a bit of philosophy and I've read a lot of philosophy. But I'm not very disciplined or patient, and I have a really bad memory. So I'm not very good at talking about philosophy that I've read, but I feel like I have quite a well-developed way of seeing the world through reading all that philosophy. So hopefully I feel like this is a nice opportunity for that to come out, and I'm really interested in sort of collaborative work and what that means and dynamics and stuff. I'm a bit of a kind of chaotic and distracted person, but I've done and I'm interested in lots of different things, and plugging those in together might be quite interesting. I'm also a trained primary school teacher, so like Morrigan, I'm very interested in kind of the group dynamics and power relationships that come along with, like having different roles and like sort of one person being the kind of steering force in a group. I find that's quite an interesting thing to explore. Yeah, that's me.
Hi, I am Betty. I have also had about 4 hours of sleep and have spoken a different language for the last 10 days, so excuse me if I'm not very articulate tonight. I've been doing philosophy for a long time, but I had a really nice entry point into philosophy. I was very fortunate to have a really good mentor and tutor that I met in my undergraduate, who was essentially teaching us philosophy without telling us it was philosophy, and always insisted on us making it relevant for our lives. So we had to write essays about how we understand this particular philosophical concept through something that is important for us in our lives. And I thought that was a great way of learning philosophy. And I always found that I learned much better when I was in a group setting. Me and Sam did a master's in philosophy together, and I think I learned basically the 10 times more when we went to the pub and chatted about philosophy afterwards than we did in the class. And I always found the classes really boring and really uncreative and really like, you know, measuring somebody's knowledge and kind of competitive and unpleasant. And it was always quite interesting for me that you could be with the same people in a different setting and have a completely different conversation afterwards. I have since then been doing more philosophy. Again, I always try to do it in group setting. I'm okay reading on my own, but I don't find it as interesting or as enjoyable as doing it with other people. I've been doing philosophy in the University of Brighton for many years now. I also teach in kind of other more formal universities, and I often find the difference quite interesting, particularly kind of the group dynamics that are produced in one space in kind of formal institutions, and the group dynamics that are produced in the University of Brighton when we do philosophy. I'm also part of various other groups. I found a text really interesting, in particular thinking about how I am now in the process of kind of redefining the group dynamics in my family, and kind of how that's forming each one of us as individuals in a different way than it was before. Is the word gregarious? No.
You are very gregarious, yeah. Very friendly, yeah.
Yeah, I like being with people. I like hanging out with people. I like being around friends and making friends. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Right, where am I? I'm up here. Let's try this. Okay, so one little thing that occurs to me is, in order for us to, I mean, I think we could jump in whenever you want, but if you know that you want to say something, maybe we have our little private chat channel, put an X in that, and I'll make sure that I kind of come to you next, so that we've got that, maybe that as just an initial protocol. We can change that if you want. That's absolutely fine. But if you have something that, you know, someone has said or something, you know, that you think, oh right, I've got something to say now, then pop that in. Otherwise, I'm kind of going to sort of work on this basis of us having a few rounds, and just go round a little bit, just until we kind of find our feet. And so the next round is perhaps to think a little bit about the folks. And actually, I mean, I wanted to do that, but actually I'm going to kind of like push that one back a little bit, because the one that's come to mind is a couple of people now have said, I think Rob's used the phrase a wall you hit when you're studying on your own, and a couple of other, I mean, and Betty just mentioned something about the groups in the conversations in pubs, and I'm interested in this, in why. I mean, well, let's start from this assumption. Let's start from the assumption that people find it easier to learn in groups than on their own, which you might want to challenge. But let's start from the assumption that people find it easier to learn in groups than on their own. Why is that? And is it just simply because when we're talking in the pub after class, or we're talking in the pub after a kind of meeting or some other space in which we're learning, is it just because it feels more informal? I'm going to use the same kind of, I'm going to use the same, when I talk about these rounds, I'm going to use the same thing of going round with each other, but because Gabby quite rightly pointed that it's unfair to always have the same one, this time I'm going to go through Morrigan, James, and do like that. So I work from, like, you can maybe see it on the screen, Morrigan, James, John, Rob, Gabby, the Sam, or something like that. So not everyone's going first in a round. But it's that question: is it just because it's more informal? Do you think? Is it because when we're in a classroom, we're all meant to be sitting there according to another set of rules, and in a pub, we're all kind of in a more informal situation? Is that why it's easier to learn, perhaps, in group situations? So, as I say, going on a round, I'm going to bring Morrigan in now.
I'm not sure whether you've done this deliberately, because I just don't play nicely with other people. So I don't find it easier to learn in a group setting. And the more informal something is, like sitting in a pub, the worse it is for me. Because I don't, so I can only talk about me in what you said there, the question. Because, there's all sorts of other things happening there around social etiquette, around how long things take different people to process. So typically I process things really, really fucking slowly. It's not because I'm overthinking them or anything. It's just because thinking for me seems to be quite hard work. So yes, why do we learn better in group settings? I think that question should be changed to why do some people learn better in group settings? So let's and maybe there's a kind of like counter question to that, which is what challenges do group settings present to some people? I feel like I'm being really contrary, but I think it'd be quite good to acknowledge that.
What kind of challenge do you think? I mean, Mike, you're mentioning processing times and things, but that's an interesting question about different challenges.
Okay, so I'm gonna move away from just myself. I was chatting to my son, has a form of epilepsy, and he has word finding difficulties. And he was talking to me today about how irritating he finds it when people make the assumption that he has a reduced intellectual capacity. So in a group setting, not only is he struggling to find the words himself to express what he's thinking, actually the stuff going in, he has to try and find what those words also mean. Yeah. So his processing speeds can be really very slow, but his intellectual capacity, he's very bright, is actually really quite high. Yeah. But on the face of it, in a group setting, he looks thick. It was a word that was used by John, I believe, earlier. Right. In a group setting, that's what he looks like. And I'm kind of, so I'm worried a bit, I suppose, around group settings and who takes up space, who presents in a certain way, who what assumptions are made. I'm not saying anyone's doing this here, but what assumptions are made. So as someone who's often goes into a group setting with you, Matt, is like, if I go in with you and they know you're a philosopher, they tend to kind of behave towards me in a different way. And I always seem sort of slightly confused as to why I haven't got an awful lot to say for myself in terms of philosophy. But if you come in with me and you're quite quiet, then people just think, oh, who's that beardy bloke in leather? And they make assumptions about you, So, yeah. What was the question?
It was to do with the different challenges that people might encounter in groups. I think you've spoken to a little bit.
I feel like I've said enough now.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to James. Are you okay there? I'm going to bring you
fine.
in.
Thanks, Matt. I agree with Morrigan. It depends, I think, on the individual, maybe their learning style and that kind of thing. Personally, I find groups, you can interact a little bit more. You can bounce ideas off or learn things of other people. I've done a little bit of distance learning and I found it was different to learning in a group. So, I mean, I probably personally do prefer sort of being in a group. But and it was interesting, the reading about, and there's that was mainly about groups as well, wasn't it? So that's about all I can think of at the moment.
That's brilliant. I'm going to bring in John. Hello, John. Do you think it's easier to learn in groups and if so, why? What do you think it is?
Not for me. If I was learning for a purpose, I find I like to be in a group session and go away and refine all that information myself. I have some auditory processing issues. So, for instance, when I take notes, I like to have notes, but then I also like to put pictures with it as well. With the event of the computer, that's a lot easier to do. So all my notes all have pictures in them to help me just figure out where that paragraph fits in with the other paragraphs and things like that. But I suppose how I see it is, someone told me once that when you play chess, there's no point playing chess with people who are as good as you or people that are worse than you. You need to be playing chess with people who are better than you, or else you just won't progress in the game. And that's what I see philosophy as, really, is I need to be around people who think differently, who act differently to what I would do, because then I'm actually learning something. So my aim in philosophy isn't to get an A. It filled my box full of information. It's actually to have knowledge and understanding of it, and the best way is to discuss that with people. Like you said in the pub, it's if somebody stands up and says I'm A, and then someone says I'm B, you naturally take one side or the other. But when you're in the pub, you can actually say, why are you A? You can lean forward, and I find that's why I like about groups. So I like to have a group beforehand, do my own work, and then a group afterwards would be best suited for me. And so with philosophy, I find it that my point is not important. I'm more interested in your points. Whereas if you were talking about football teams or American football or anything like that, I'm only interested in my point of view.
Okay, I'm going to move to Rob. Hello, Rob. Maybe your comments here.
I think it depends on the group, and some groups are more suited for learning than others, and it also depends on your pedagogy and what you mean by knowledge. And I guess because I work in a nursery, and I think so. So I guess so if you're in a group where the aim is to just like memorize like pre-made knowledge, then that's kind of not that interesting for me. And also I think that's where the problems come up for people who have different styles of learning, or who have different ways of like engaging with knowledge. That style of learning, some people are really going to suffer, because all you're doing is just memorizing basically like ready-made facts, and for me that isn't really learning. I think for me it's more about like a group constructing knowledge for themselves, and like it being relevant to their own lives and to the things around them. And that's where a group can sort of really propel learning forward, I think, because in that situation, like at my workplace, there's not like a teacher at the front and then everyone's sat there and they're memorizing sort of things that I'm saying. It's more of like, it is quite a chaotic environment. There's loads going on, and all of us, including the adults, are like in this process of discovery, which is like always unfolding, and that's kind of like the group dynamic that I'm really interested in and would love to explore in other parts of life, like because I think there are problems with my workplace. You know, it's the fact that it basically exists under capitalism. There are limits there, but it seems like there are some really important lessons there as well. So yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Gabby.
So the question was
kind of, why is it easier to learn in groups? I suppose we're kind of thinking. I was just beginning to think about that. If it is, obviously, a couple of people have suggested that it's not always, and troubled that a bit.
Yeah. So I have diagnoses of ADHD and autism, which I think I don't like to take them for. I say them now as a kind of shorthand to put across some things to people, but I do kind of problematize them as stories. But I have issues with concentration, focus, in some ways, and I often find in classroom environments it quite difficult to. I've always found it quite difficult to focus for a long time on what a teacher or lecturer is saying. And I relate to Betty's kind of thing of the pub afterwards, after the philosophy lecture being a far more kind of conducive kind of to thought for myself. I find that the kind of associative, speculative thought that I associate with philosophy can come quite easy to me. And the difficult thing is repressing it and channeling it into the ways, into the places where I would like it to go. So Rob mentioned that wall when you're studying on your own, which I'm familiar with. And for me, it's like the idea of studying involves kind of or any creative endeavor really requires both the kind of positive kind of building creation creative aspect, as well as the kind of self-repressing, channeling, guiding, editing aspect. And I could find the second part really, really exhausting to do on my own myself. And so to have a group, to have some kind of space or other that is able to help enact that helpfully repressive apparatus can be quite useful for me, I find, and can actually lead to some really good experiences. I've lost my train of thought. Could someone come in and repress me?
I'm going to bring Sam and Betty in.
Yeah.
I kind of want to echo a little bit about what Gabby said, particularly, kind of this. I guess it ties to what Rob was saying as well about the kind of memorizing, fact learning aspects of knowledge, and then the more productive aspects of knowledge. And I suppose when I was talking about learning better in the pub, I was thinking about this trajectory from starting in school where you just have to memorize all these things for exams and etc. And then you don't really have any scope, or very little, I found in my experience, to have the creative aspect, or like the kind of producing something in school. And then I guess I was a bit disappointed that also was not the case in university. I went to uni and it was all like mostly just memorizing stuff again for exams. Sorry, the dog is distracting. And then everybody kept saying, oh well, when you go higher, you'll have that aspect of producing something. And then I went into the masters, and it was exactly the same. It was just some dudes arguing about Hegel and Kant, and it was just really boring. And I guess the group aspect for me was partially also because it was more fun. So like I feel like I learned better there, partially because the rules were different, and yes, it was a bit more informal, and you could ask questions and etc. But also, it was just more fun, and you could actually talk to people and see how they relate that to their own experiences, rather than just kind of abstractly talking about. About what Kant said on page 25 or something like that. So yeah, I guess that was it. I guess it wasn't so much learning necessarily in the informal group setting, but it was more finding the applicability of theory and philosophy to life, and why it's actually relevant and not just some boring stuff that somebody's written 1,000 years ago. Yes, I think I'm rambling a bit now. Yes, I think that's what I was talking about.
Okay, I wonder if I can share. I'm going to see if I can share this now. There we go. That's not. No, hang on. It's not quite showing it all. No, it doesn't want to show it all, unfortunately. So let me see if I can just get the bit. So this is something that Fuchs talks about. He says a basic law of group dynamics. And this is the bit. I will share this bit. I'll change that. So let's see that. There we go. Why is it doing that? Don't do that. Stop doing that, you bastard. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that. God. Okay, I'm just going to say it then. Right. So a basic law of group dynamics is that in a group, he says, people collectively constitute the very norm from which they individually deviate. Okay, and so it's a different. So often when people talk about norms and rules and the way in which you're meant to behave, so we oh god, there's all sorts of things popping up. I'm just gonna, but this idea is that in a group you collectively constitute the very norm from which individually you deviate. And now I think that's a really interesting idea to do with a group, because it reorientates, for me, it reorientates this idea of things like social norms, which is this very vague idea about there being rules. So, people were talking about like their experiences a little bit in groups, why the experience might be easier or harder to learn. But I'm kind of curious to pursue this thing about is there a different kind of rule in a group? Is there a different norm that's established in a group? Is it possible for a group to establish, as it were, its own norms outside of the social norms? Because obviously that we can assume, for the sake of argument, that there are kind of social norms that we all learn, and there are kind of familial norms that we all learn. So we're brought up in certain ways by particular kinds of families, and we're brought up in particular kind of societies. Oh, don't forget Sam. Yes, Sam, you can come in after this. That's what happens if there's two of you on the screen there. But the idea for Fuchs is that the group itself establishes its own norms, and then you kind of so you can imagine being in like 5 different groups with 5 different norms and deviating as an individual in 5 different ways from each of those particular groups. And in a sense, that deviation, presumably, because of the multiplicity of groups, is almost it almost feels more perhaps personal, more intimate, rather than imposed from outside, because you've collectively, if the idea that you collectively establish these norms as together as the group. Now that's possibly not that clear, but Sam, you come in and come back on me.
Well, one of the things I kind of felt about the Fuchs piece was that it kind of felt like Fuchs was talking about almost kind of sort of flat horizontal relationships in these groups, where everybody is sort of appears to be on an equal footing, and these things are just like the norms are organically produced almost as just kind of individuals interact. But what Fuchs is actually talking about specifically is psychoanalytic group work, and one of the things that kind of made me think about was like how sort of roles develop or are a formal part of groups, and that's a really important thing around which you get kind of, instead of just what appears like a fairly neutral idea of a norm, you get kind of strong norms. So like, for example, in a classroom, you've got the norms of, doing what the teacher says, or you might have in a particular classroom the norm of, everybody ignores what the teacher says and the kids start kind of chatting until they get shouted at, which is, that's not part of the kind of formal normative structure of a classroom that we might think of abstractly, but each classroom or group of kids in interaction with a teacher, or each group of patients in interaction with a therapist or doctor, has that sort of relational norm that kind of builds. So I'm quite interested, like, what happens, and one of the things that I find interesting about being in the pub as opposed to being in the seminar room is that those kind of dynamics around knowledge that we see in universities, for example, are really disrupted. I love the pub. It's really fun. I'm way more articulate. It's great, and it's a really nice place to digest intellectual experiences, I think. But it doesn't, the norms that kind of come to the fore there are like, maybe kind of Morrigan hinted at this, but like kind of, gendered and class and race and all these other kinds of dynamics that are kind of society at large are a bit more, play into who gets to talk and who gets listened to and all that kind of stuff. And now I'm rambling. I'll stop there and leave Gabby, I think, to come back on that as well.
I was, so when I read the piece with folks, I'm gonna do my thing and bring in Lacan, and I found myself basically feeling that the whole kind of thing that he was talking about, this dynamic matrix, that he recognized as being above and beyond the individuals, that context that constitute a group. I found that basically very similar, if not identical, to what Lacan tried to bring into psychoanalysis, which is one of his chief kind of things, which was bringing in this notion of a symbolic order, that is so like which involves the roles that a person. A symbolic order is constituted by the language and culture and everything of society. Is basically kind of Freud made social, and an individual enters into the symbolic order by taking on the roles that it imposes onto you. So this idea of roles is, for group dynamics, I feel is pretty important. And I was thinking through that quite early in the paper by this example that he puts up of a chess match, and how a chess match is how did he put it? Is above and beyond what the individual, the chess match that couple. So I'm just trying to find it. It's quite early on. No, I can't. Sorry, someone tried to say something. Or was that an echo? I think that was an echo. So for me, when two people kind of enter into a chess match with each other, it's very difficult to tell by the moves that they are making what kind of relationship to their mother or father they may have had growing up. Rather, the rules of the game, they're taking on the roles, the social roles of chess players in relationship to each other, means that they understand that the rules of the game of chess are kind of repressing all the possible responses they might have for each other into only the possible moves of chess. So a chess player may have all kinds of emotional kind of possibilities when facing their opponent, but all of that has to get channeled into pawn to e4 or whatever, because that is the social role, that is the kind of way the group dynamics, the group norms of a game of chess kind of work. Yeah, I think I've probably rambled a few points enough for now.
God, I'm fascinated though, because I don't actually, I want to see the chess thing now, because I can't remember this, and I reread it earlier.
It's a bit of a throwaway comment for him.
No, there's a couple of little throwaway comments, but I think that was. Can anyone else did anyone else remember exactly where that is? Because I can.
I think it's the first paragraph or second paragraph. Maybe.
Oh right. It must have slipped straight by me. That I think. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah, it's like the second sentence. Already, when two people form a relationship and create a new phenomenon, just as when two people play chess with each other, they create a new phenomenon, namely the game of chess which they produce.
Right, there we are. We can share the screen. We can all see it exactly. Defense is. This is from literally in the first paragraph there, isn't it? And you're talking about this particular. So okay, that's kind of interesting, because I mean he says at one point something like mental processes interact rather than individuals, and you would sort of push back a little. Is it push back, do you think, and say actually it's more language that's going on here rather than sort of this mental process, or that they're talking about the same thing, mental processes and the link, the symbolic order or the linguistic background that we're in? They're basically talking about the same thing. So when we speak, it's kind of language speaks through us, as some philosophers say.
Yeah, I think that's some of what he's getting at here, but without really getting all the way to that. Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting, because I mean one of the reasons I quite like some of the Fuchs is because, I mean, as you're well aware, I follow the everything we can do to escape Lacan kind of route of thinking, everything we can do to try and avoid getting dragged, and it's very good to have have that relationship between is it useful, how much are we connected to Lacan, how much is it something different, and part of the reason for that is because of this not axiom, this kind of principle that Guattari quite often articulates of escape from language. If a schizoanalysis is a kind of an attempt to escape from language, and it's often, for me, I often read that as a kind of intention with the link with structuralism generally, and Lacan in a kind of way. So in a sense, one of the things that was interesting to me about that quote from Fuchs, that one, that quote from Fuchs, there it is. Sorry, stop it, but is that are groups able to really constitute their own norms, or are they only able to constitute norms, as it were, within a wider set of norms? And so one of the things we might say from Lacan is that no, actually, they're always going to be caught back within language. They're always going to be, that's going to be kind of over-determining, so no matter what we try and do here, it's still, in a sense, we're still playing a game within language, and we can't go beyond those borders. And so I think sometimes maybe that I mean, and I'm interested in whether we can, I suppose, or whether that's possible.
Can we overturn the chessboard?
Can we make a new game? Yeah, maybe I would phrase it maybe. Yeah, can we overturn the chessboard? Can we make new games? Can we make new games? Is it? I mean, are we? I mean, I'm a revolutionary. I kind of work on the basis that somehow capitalism organizes our life, and yet at the same time, as a revolutionary, I have to kind of assert that it's possible to create new forms of life. Now that's in a kind of political economy situation, so that's a little bit more easy to understand in a sense. And obviously, once we move to the kind of more psychoanalytic or kind of consciousness, let's say consciousness relationship, perhaps, I don't like that word, but then we're talking much more general or much more universal level than a specific social economic situation. And so I don't know, are we I mean, would any revolutionary situation, I suppose, still be caught within some general rules, general orders, that Lacan articulates as a symbolic order, other people might articulate as forms of human nature, or they're sort of generalized forms in which any political economy, any particular social situation is going to operate. And obviously classic Freudians would in a sense say that the Oedipus complex is a kind of universal. So you can have a capitalist society, a socialist society, a communist society, an anarchist society, but then the Oedipus complex would still operate in all of them. And presumably Lacan would say something like the symbolic order would still operate in all of these as well. And so if that's the case, then you can see why people might want to focus more on those universal spaces, those those orders that are trans-historical in a sense. Is that too vague? Morrigan, I can see you. I'm encouraging people here, so I can see you sort of possibly wanting to say something.
I was just sewing Raven's handbag back together to help me concentrate, and I was just giving it her back, saying, However, it feels like the groups that you're talking about are outside of the moment. I almost can't explain what it is that I mean by this. So the chess, it's like that's strategic, yeah. So playing chess, it's about thinking forwards into the future, isn't it? It's not about what happens at that particular moment, yeah. And the way that people collectively constitute, I don't know, mine feels really embodied. The collective constitution. So one of the things that really shocked me when Eric Garner died was the people, the group standing around videoing on their mobile phones. And I suppose what shocked me is because it used to be illegal to show the moment of death on TV screens. They were called snuff movies, That group, how are those groups being constituted? In what way are they establishing their own norm? There's been so many of them. People just they're like trapped in the moment, rather than being outside of the moment. And the norm is not something that the group is establishing. So if the norm is something that's being imposed on them, then are they a group? I'm a bit sort of like, I think I might have missed something. But yeah, that's what was going on in my head. I've stopped talking, yeah?
Yeah, I've got that. So there we go. Here we are.
Why am I on screen now?
I can go on screen, I guess. Well, that's kind of made me think about about something that maybe we want to also think about, which I think Sam mentioned in the beginning, and now what Morrigan said just made me think about it as well, which is maybe the difference between different groups and groups that are, I guess, formally established with a purpose, such as maybe a class in university, where the purpose is learning, maybe, and groups that are more informally established, maybe, and like serve a particular function for the moment, like the group filming Eric Garner's death, for instance, or like, I don't know, an informal group of friends that like hanging out together. So and that was, I guess, a bit in the, what was his name, Falk? Fawkes piece, because I think I was thinking about informal groups, I guess, when I was reading it. But then what Sam said made me realize that he's maybe thinking about more formal groups where the function of the group is to attend like a group psychoanalytic session or whatever. And maybe the two groups are kind of qualitatively different somehow.
Okay, yeah. So there's an important thing to maybe think about in terms of formal and informal. I'm going to move to Rob.
It's just that what's been said now is just reminding me of. I think we touched on it a little bit, but it's Guattari's thing of the subject and the subjugated group, and there was a really nice example in something I was reading, which stuck with me about like a queue, like just a group of people queuing up, like at the bank or something. I mean, they are a group, but they're there for something like external. They're not a group in itself. And then there's I quite like the example of say, or like to imagine how that could become. They could suddenly form as a subject group. Say like if something happened to them suddenly, and they would start turning to each other and talking to each other and that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know. I just really like that example, and I really like what Morrigan and Betty were saying as well about. And I think Morrigan said something like it's that something's imposed on them. I think that was the word you used, and that reminded me of the subjugated group as like it is a group, but like they haven't really fully formed as a group in and of themselves, but they potentially could. And the other thing I suppose is just because a group does form a subject group, it could still be a reactionary one. You know, it doesn't have to be a revolutionary one. So there's like it's I don't know, it's complicated, isn't it? You could form some sort of fascist group, and as opposed to a revolutionary group. Yeah, I don't know, I'm sort of rambling now, but
I think we're all allowed to ramble. That's perfectly fine. No one worry about rambling here. We're not performing like a superiority of intelligence. We are going to ramble. This is kind of what we're doing. And I think rambling. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because rambling's such a lovely word. If you're wandering around the countryside, and somehow when we're having a conversation in a kind of public space, rambling is like a sign of we indicate like. We're not quite sure what we're doing, or somehow like that. It's a move of self-deprecation. We all do, I think, sometimes, and it's fair. I mean, we all do it, I'm sure. But I want to go back to that little thing. That so this. Hopefully, you can see this. So. So collectively they constitute the very norm from which individually they deviate, and so we've got formal and informal, and we've also got like groups that arise quickly, like a queue. And then dissipate, don't have sort of sustained time. So there's kind of length of time, maybe some sort of relationship to time over this. And then there's obviously the fact that they can go in different social political dynamics, as Rob mentioned. They can go in a kind of revolutionary dynamic or a reactionary dynamic, perhaps. But what I kind of got the sense in what Fuchs was talking about was that he had this idea, and for me, I think maybe this is why I missed the chess as well. One of the first things I noticed in the paper was him trying to articulate this sense of resistance to the idea that your thinking is actually driven by the group, which is basically what he was saying. You are not fundamentally an individual prior to and then pushed into a group. He wants to kind of invert this from let me put myself up. So he kind of wants to invert this. Usually you'd have the individual that kind of forms together. Forms together, and there's a little group, and he wants to turn it around, and so that the group is kind of above, and you're kind of formed in your roles in there, and that what's going on is not so much a group think, but in a sense, perhaps to come back to the kind of the game thing that Gabby was mentioning. It perhaps what happens is that you can only think in so far as that group has allowed you to think that particular space, and this is kind of what he's pushing at, you know. So each different, now my idea is, or my thought is, well, how much can that be pushed and expanded, you know? So in a queue out in the bank, to use Rob's example, obviously there's different cultural context for this, but let's use the UK context because it's a bit of a joke in the UK. Everyone knows how to queue supposedly, and you can, you know, and everyone is supposed to know the norm of how to queue. Sorry, come on, go on, Morrigan, what are you saying? Go on.
No, they don't. They fucking don't. There's like, so somewhere in the idea of kind of normative behaviour, we were there at the patisserie yesterday, but it didn't. The queuing system didn't work, and it made me very anxious. But to kind of anyway, so that this doesn't get lost, to go back to the Fuchs thing, I think it's crucially important that he uses the word patience quite a lot, yeah, because obviously this has something to do, or students, you know, what Betty's talking about, being a student. So these are definitely roles with or without power, yeah, and Fuchs talks about the molecular in terms of the individual and the group dynamic, and it made me think of organic and inorganic, kind of like functional and accidental, because queues are kind of accidental, aren't they? You know, if the service was running, no one would be queuing, sort of thing. But this kind of molecular idea of like groups being like cells or atoms or proteins or things that are just kind of bumping into each other constantly. But that doesn't seem to be how we're thinking about group. We seem to be thinking about group as you know, something like a game, something that has rules, something that already has like very predefined ways of things being done that have been, you know, almost like predetermined in some sort of way. Yeah, that's maybe not quite how I see group. I don't know.
Do you want to say a bit more about how you do see a group?
Well, yeah, just not substantively human, I suppose, you know. So like if you're growing carrots or leeks or Jerusalem artichokes, you know, they don't do things in this ordered way. They're not playing this game of allotment, you know. They kind of do things in their own way, or dogs in parks when they meet up. There's some sort of chaos that's implicit there, where the rules just don't, you know, what are the rules in this situation? Or I don't know. I mean, XR are out on the streets of London today, aren't they? They're obviously a mega group with little cell-like structures that exist within them, allegedly. Or, you know, things like armies. I was thinking about the Republican Army there. Anyway, I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole, but essentially that groups don't, I find it to be more kind of like chaotic. And the only way it's not chaotic is where someone goes, I'm the analyst, I'm the doctor, you're the patient, or I'm the lecturer, you're the student, or I'm the whatever, where people are assigned roles. I'm not sure that's how it works.
Interesting. Yeah. When I was thinking about the question about the pub, one of the things that I didn't say, but I was thinking, is that part of the experience for me that's really powerful about learning together in a pub is that it builds, kind of continually builds relationships, which tend to have lots of facets, which is a bit different if you just spend a few weeks sat in a classroom for an hour or two every week with people. And like, I feel like groups do I kind of instinctively want to say groups do tend to kind of come together in norms once people spend enough time together and kind of practice the same ways of interacting or encountering whatever the group's for. I just had this kind of vision of like, you know, like lads outside the pub who just, you know, if they spend years together, just have their kind of bantery, boyish way of being together. But that's like it is quite it looks quite coherent and consistent as a kind of group norm once enough kind of time and repetition has passed. Like something like a queue, or like a queue that's disrupted by, I don't know, like some emergency or something. Like, yeah, there's a lot more kind of chaotic stuff going on. But if, you know, if that queue were, you know, ended up trapped on a subway train for a week or something, then I would think you would get these kind of crystallizations of these individuals kind of having created a norm and then deviating from it. I don't know, makes me think of a bit like a zombie film or something.
Well, let's teach or train people, talk about norming, storing and performing, don't we? And the question is noting which part you're in and not getting too upset when you're in the storming stage, because obviously you're working it out, aren't you, what your roles are within it.
Yeah, I was just gonna respond a bit to that allotment comment from Morgan, that the vegetables aren't necessarily playing the allotment game with you, and I kind of disagree. I think they are. Like we have names for them. They have roles that have existed for generations, millennia even. They've come to us through our culture, which have kind of named them and bred them, and according to how previous people in our have interacted with them and grown them, and so in that sense, I feel like there is a game going on. There are social roles being played out. You could teach me how to play this game in ways that don't necessarily require the same, like, it doesn't require me to have the same kind of family dynamics as you put it in kind of Freudian term, because the kind of processes exist above that. Yeah, that's it. That was my comment.
I think that's fair enough. I'm going to just bring up that I want to bring up something from the text again here. So hopefully you can all see that. So this is Fuchs on page 227. And it was this, just as I do not doubt the phenomenon of mind, I do not doubt the existence of the individual person. The individual person not only exists in his mind and in our own experience, but his body is undoubtedly an individual coherent entity. In this way, in our groups too, the individuals react to each other, show their individuality, develop their own ideas and fantasies about the group, about the therapist, about certain co-members and so forth. Nevertheless, my own studies and experiences in group analytic groups led me to see the existence of a suprapersonal mental matrix and to speculate and theorize about this. I love that, the suprapersonal mental matrix. This is a typical, I love certain things when philosophers or people have these mad notions. And to speculate and theorize about this, I can put this quite simply. I thought to myself, what an enormous complexity of processes and actions and interactions play between even two or three of these people, or these people and myself, or between two in relation to another three, and so on. What enormous complexity, quite impossible to perceive and disentangle even theoretically all at the same time. How is it they can nevertheless understand each other? that they can to some extent refer to a shared and common sense of what is going on. They move in a meaningful way from point A to point B, and the same applies to me myself. Now, when you talk, Gabby, for example, about you can learn to play the rules, in a sense, is this learning to make meaning or learning to be meaningful rather than learning to be meaningless? And so is that our indication of like, I'm learning the rule, I can play the rule because what I'm doing to you seems meaningful?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. You learn the role, which at first allows communication, but also allows elaboration and to deviate from knowing the game of chess. I could know how to play 5-minute blitz chess or chess. I've forgotten all the gamey the versions of chess you can play with.
Boxing chess.
Boxing chess. I could play boxing chess. Yeah. Like I can understand, deviate, or can construct new games. It's possible, as you were kind of saying before, to create new games with reference to that old one. And I think there is there's often, at least for me, I find there's a lot more kind of potential for creativity and freedom when I'm trying to when I'm trying to do some creative endeavor, when I'm trying to do something. When I start from in reference to something, well, what's the vitally kind of quote, the tyranny of the blank page or something like that is quite difficult to deal with, whereas starting from something ends up allowing potentially for more elaboration and deviation when you in reference to some role or such or game.
Sorry, Mike was muted. It did actually tell me then. It told me not to be so stupid and not mute Mike. So I suppose here I want to kind of push something that I think is important, but I'm not entirely sure, and I don't want it to be confrontational. So I'm going to be sort of prefacing it with that, which is one of the things I think schizoanalysis tries to do, and I think is important in doing this, is place the realm of meaning as underneath a wider realm, underneath a wider realm of sign making, if you like, or something like making a signal, the capacity to make a signal, not me, and so meaning and meaningful stuff that are games, if you like. Let's use that phrase, that have these kind of norms or rules. They are only one part, one subgroup of a much wider process of connection, productive connection. And I think this is one of the kind of crucial moves that psychoanalysis tries to make. And I think Fanon is also making this at certain points. That is a very weird angle, Morrigan. Well, this is so it's fine. It's just a very strange angle. For a moment, I thought it was like, yeah. But and so this I suppose is what's kind of is of interest to me, because I think one of the things that philosophy suffers from is and this perhaps is my sometimes resistance to Lacan, but I think one of the things that philosophy suffers from is that it assumes meaning is overarching, and it assumes all kind of processes are part of an overarching game of meaning. Whereas I think one of the things that schizoanalysis does is place meaning back in an overarching gaming of making connection. And making connection is a much wider, not all connections are meaningful connections. but they're still connections. And meaning is just one form of a connection. And I think that's kind of what I'm interested in terms of thought, because I think when we begin to think, particularly when we're trying to think, as it were, outside of the bounds of the thoughts that have been given to us, as it, you know, if you like, outside of the bounds of our contemporary society, outside of the bounds of the norms we live in, which is you're trying to often do as a philosopher, you're also trying to do as a philosopher, as a revolutionary. Then that process of connection making is, I think, the one that needs to be kind of accessed and worked with, and there it's always, in a sense, the things that are always meaningless connections that are still connections seem to me to be the things that draw my attention. Why is this still a connection, even if there's no meaning there, there's no rule, there's a kind of what is still enabling that connection to take place? And obviously this enables, if there is this wider realm of connection production, of which meaning is just a subgroup. One of the arguments I would suggest is that, in fact, this is exactly what we see in what we call the natural world, is connection production that's not meaningful, and has no relationship to meaning whatsoever. And in fact, I would argue that, in fact, that's also how capitalism operates. And this is kind of crucial to understanding how capitalism operates. It operates by producing a series of connections that have no meaning whatsoever, and ascribing meaning to them is a secondary operation. It's like secondary dynamics, secondary mode. And the primary mode is a different form of connection making. And so I think that's kind of where I think I'm interested in. I think that's what schizoanalysis brings to the table, and I think that's, in a sense, what Fanon brings to the table when he talks about colonialism. He's not simply talking about it being a way in which an already established meaning, you know, separates out the colonized from the colonizer. It's as though there are already established processes of connection that then later produce this secondary effect of some people are colonized and some people are colonizers, some people are racialized and other people are supposedly not. You know, or essentially they make the black-white kind of distinction in racial distinctions. And so the primary process is something else. And that's, I think, how we encounter that primary process is almost impossible as an individual, because we're always, as an individual, part of a secondary process. We're always, as an individual, you know, found primarily within a process of meaning creation, meaning recognition, meaning production, even rather than connection production. Perhaps this is why people have an interest in love, I think. Personally, it's a kind of connection production that's often before meaning production. I'm going to just indicate that we're probably going to finish in about 9 minutes at 1:30, because I think that will be enough for today, and I think people have been here, and that's great. So what I'd like to suggest is maybe kind of last thoughts, last kind of moments, and obviously we've got River, and we can talk there about how we do next week and what we move to next week, and go on and do things with. But I'm just giving that indication. It's 21 minutes past now, so we'll be finishing at 1:30, I think, tonight. Has that just brought the conversation to a complete dead stop?
Maybe we are all getting a bit tired. Well, one thing that I was just thinking as you were talking, actually, was how I felt like the most interesting part of this folk piece for me was that bit where he talks about the mind being defined by the group, or not really. I'm not doing it justice. He uses a very specific expression, and he's trying to bring a lot of nuance to it. But the general idea was how the mind is not just constituted by the group, but just is a group mind. Is that fair? Sorry, I'm really tired. And I guess that kind of made me wonder what we're touching upon of like what, you know, is actually a group, what's the function of a group, whether you know, what constitutes a group. And I was wondering, well, I was thinking along the lines of the allotment again, and how, well, whether the leaks in the allotment are part of and how they are part of the constitution of the mind, of the collective mind. Maybe is there a collective mind? I don't know. Sorry, I'm really rambling now. I'll stop.
I was just thinking, Matt, if it's all right, about what you just said about the connection production, like before meaning, and I'm thinking about children are just so good at this, and like I'm thinking about when a child does a drawing, it's just pure connection production, and then like some stupid adult comes over and says, like, tell me what it means, and they'll just look at you like you're an idiot, because for them it's just connection production, and then the meaning is kind of put on afterwards. So that's just all I wanted to say.
Did anyone notice the let me this is on page 228, middle paragraph, and this was an example that I thought, this is a troublesome example. So he's talking about this way in which people are kind of noticing each other, communicating, and to me that's connection. And so it's communication, can be read as meaning information, or it can be read as connection of some kind. And he uses this example, mental processes and he talks about mental processes going through, that we're actually operating with group mental processes. And he says mental processes per se cannot interact, but no one would doubt that, to use a simple example, and I don't think this is a simple example, but no one would doubt that, to use a simple example, one homosexual recognizes the other before they know anything of each other instinctively, as we say. Now, aside from the kind of language of homosexual, which is like deeply 1970s, and you wouldn't normally encounter very much nowadays, and is sometimes problematic for some people, that sense of instinctively there, and he actually uses the word again, and he's talking about what I would refer to as an automatism, an automatic process. But now what he wants to say here, I think, is that, I think it's having read some of Fuchs's other stuff, and I will say this about Fuchs's, I do think he's probably quite a reactionary in many ways, socially reactionary. There's a number of places in which he uses a very, very common trope with regard to same-sex relationships, that's classically Oedipal and all these kind of things. That's deeply problematic. So I would say, we're dealing with someone who's got a kind of reactionary background, not someone who's necessarily particularly progressive. And I think the example itself is not simple, but what he's talking about are, I'm assuming, groups that are supposedly, or people who can encounter each other contrary to a norm, a social norm. That's what I think he's trying to do here, is use this sort of thing so they can instinctively recognize each other. Now, is that because, as was well developed inside the gay community, there was huge number of meaningful signs that were given, like coding, and so that you could code relationships with each other, and so you could have a kind of code, whether this was Polari or whether this was, various other things. There were ways in which a community under attack had to defend itself and used its own particular structures of meaning so that you could recognize those. And perhaps the same with left-wingers, or anarchists who use particular indications, or reactionary right-wingers, dog whistles, for example, do the same kind of thing. So you can kind of indicate and connect with other people. But these are all things that we recognize. You have to be able to recognize them in order for them to operate. And that recognition process in order to operate. Now, if what he's saying is just reducible to we can recognize certain signs, then I think essentially that's just a particular development of like being within a meaningful structure. But what he seems to be saying is, if it's possible, is that there are certain kind of automatisms that can take place of connection. Now that I think is a little bit more interesting. Automatisms of connection, ways in which we kind of, and that we call these things instincts, as though somehow they're natural processes, in inverted commas. Now I'm kind of interested in whether those things perhaps are the thing we need to most be aware of, what our automatisms are, what the kind of connections we make are, the ones that kind of are flowing behind us in much the same way that a notion of a symbolic order might be flowing behind us.
It's true, we do recognize each other.
you're gonna agree with him.
Absolutely. We just, yeah.
Well, people
No,
talk
I
about
mean,
gaydar. People talk about gaydar or something, don't they? I mean, there's that notion that this is a very colloquial term, and again, I think that's sometimes a quite problematic thing. But I mean, that's the kind of example we're talking about here. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's problematic. There's elements of truth and there's elements of it being bollocks. Morgan, do you want to say something?
Yeah, he goes on to talk about the masochist and the sadist, doesn't he? But how I read that is that it's like they facilitate the becoming of each other, if that makes sense. I mean, you're not going to figure out that hopefully people are not going to figure out they're a sadist unless they get some sort of, lead from someone who's a masochist. They're not going to go and discover it all on their own, if you see what I mean, hopefully. So that's something interesting about a very small group, isn't it? Is the way that the members can define each other, and how that's not always immediately apparent once that's happened from the outside in terms of power. Was there some talk about pub?
Yes, there was some talk about pub, I believe. Having mentioned that earlier, okay, I'm gonna wind us up for the evening here. I've really enjoyed this, everybody. So thank you very, very much for participating in this. It's been really useful. I think we can have a little debrief in Natter in River about stuff, and I'll suggest a couple of things that we might want to do next week. But if you've got any kind of things as I say, this is an open space at this point, so it's really, you're allowed to follow along and just take your time, or if you've got an idea, immediately bring it to the table, chuck it on the table. And as I say, I'm hoping that we can begin to think about how we work with something like the written word in these spaces, so that it's kind of part of we kind of find a way of bringing it into our communication. This goes all the way back to Phaedrus, when people are looking at the Phaedrus with me and Plato's relationship with the written word and the spoken word and all those kind of things. So thank you very much, everybody. That's been great. I'm going to wander you all off now, and yes, maybe see people in pub or not, in some physical space where we can, and hopefully see some of you next week. Okay.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you.
Okay, so that was the end of our first session. As you can see, we are just beginning to sort of have a look at what it is to be a group, and to begin to explore some of the things that we can produce together. And as I've mentioned at the start, the idea is that we will begin to work to producing some text together. And so you're welcome and encouraged to follow us on our little journey here, to join in if you want to. There is a chat stream that you can join in, either YouTube or Facebook or Twitch. You can join in with us on the chat stream, and we will be more than happy to have your comments, as long as they're obviously polite and constructive. But yeah, come in and follow along or join in as you will. And in the meantime, give us a follow on Twitch, and we'll see you here next Monday at about the same kind of time. Thank you very much, everybody.